Hello, everyone. Today, I'm breaking down a case where, from the very first minutes, the facts simply refuse to line up. Guayaquil, Ecuador, December 21st, 2020. Around 11:30 p.m., the parents of a young woman named Lisbeth receive a call from her father-in-law, Bolivar. On the other end of the line, the message is short and direct. Come over. She's gone. Her mother and father rush to their daughter's home, located inside an upscale gated community. Lisbeth is lying at the bottom of a staircase. Nearby is her husband, Luis. For some reason, he has a cut above his left eyebrow. Luis gives the parents an explanation. According to him, about an hour earlier, he had been approached by street robbers near a gym. He called his wife to tell her what had happened. Hearing the news, Lisbeth supposedly became overwhelmed, lost her footing on the stairs, and fell. At first glance, it sounds like a tragic accident. But then there are the details that immediately start breaking that story apart. The front doors of the house are locked from the inside. Lisbeth's hair is completely wet. And by the time her parents arrive, a doctor is already inside the home. He had been quickly brought there by Luis's relatives. Right there at the scene, he issues an official death certificate, listing the cause of death as an acute heart attack. That raises an obvious question. How does a fall down a staircase turn into a heart attack on an official document? And who decided to wash Lisbeth's hair before law enforcement even arrived? It's hard to ignore the possibility that this was not the scene of an accident, but a setting that had been hurriedly arranged. Just one day before the incident on the staircase, on the evening of December 20th, Lisbeth had dinner with her parents. Her mother and father were waiting for her at a restaurant. Lisbeth arrived much later than expected, and when she finally got there, the tension at the table was impossible to miss. Luis openly and aggressively criticized his wife over a set of misplaced car keys. Lisbeth tried to defend herself, insisting she had left them at home, but the argument continued. After dinner, the couple left together. That was the last time her parents saw their daughter alive. To understand the real significance of what seemed like a small domestic argument, we need to go back several years. Lisbeth and Luis first met when they were both 15 years old. Their relationship lasted 11 years, and from the outside, it appeared almost perfect. Luis carefully built the image of an ideal partner. He was attentive, courteous, and always seemed respectful around Lisbeth's family. He opened car doors, helped her parents, and presented himself as someone they could completely trust. In the fall of 2019, the couple got married. By that point, Lisbeth had already earned her engineering degree. She worked in the import department of a major corporation, and in her spare time, she generated additional income as a professional makeup artist. She was building a career that was entirely her own. Luis's finances, meanwhile, were tied to his family's auto parts business. In the middle of 2020, the newlyweds purchased a spacious 2-story home inside a private residential community. You have to admit, it sounds like the kind of polished success story people love to admire. You look at a couple like this and assume everything is under control. But any experienced investigator will tell you that the more perfect the image, the more likely there are secrets hiding behind it. And those secrets surfaced almost immediately once investigators began speaking with Lisbeth's closest friends. According to multiple witnesses, the image of the caring gentleman began falling apart not long after the wedding. Their statements painted a troubling picture. Inside the home, there was a pattern of ongoing abuse. Luis had established near-total control over his wife's movements. What began as psychological pressure escalated remarkably quickly into physical aggression. Lisbeth found herself trapped in a situation she struggled to escape. She hid the repeated injuries from her parents because she was terrified of destroying the image of the happy marriage that both families had spent more than a decade believing in. The day after that tense dinner, Monday, December 21st, Lisbeth stayed home and worked remotely. Luis left for his auto parts store and later headed to the gym. Earlier in the day, Lisbeth's mother sent her a message asking about her plans. The response was brief. She said she was overwhelmed with paperwork and had a lot to finish. Later that night, Around 10:30 p.m., her mother tried calling again. The phone rang, but nobody answered. About an hour later came the call from Bolivar, announcing that Lisbeth was gone. Now take a step back and put those pieces together. A documented history of domestic abuse, a heated argument over car keys the night before, a day spent working alone in an otherwise empty house. And then, just hours later, a sudden death officially attributed to a heart attack. The picture that begins to emerge is difficult to ignore. At that point, the theory of a simple accidental fall down the stairs seems increasingly hard to reconcile with the facts. The following morning, December 22nd, everything changed. By then, Lisbeth's parents had learned from her friends about the alleged pattern of abuse inside the marriage. They no longer believed the death certificate listing a heart attack as the cause of death. They became convinced that a serious crime had occurred. The family immediately went to the prosecutor's office and formally requested a forensic examination of Lisbeth's body. That decision set a legal process in motion, and it was a process the husband's side of the family appeared completely unprepared for. Meanwhile, preparations for the funeral were already underway. Luis's relatives had organized everything with remarkable speed. But in the middle of the memorial gathering, forensic investigators unexpectedly entered the building. In their hands was an official court order authorizing the removal of the remains for an independent autopsy. And this is where I want you to pay close attention to the reaction of the grieving husband. The moment uniformed investigators appeared at the door, Luis did not rush over to ask questions. He did not demand answers. He did not attempt to stop the removal of his wife's remains. Instead, he exchanged a silent glance with his brother, Miguel. Then both men moved immediately. They rushed out of the building, jumped into a vehicle, and sped away from the property at such a high rate of speed that, according to reports, they nearly struck one of the officers on their way out. Watching that sequence of events raises a very obvious question, because fleeing a memorial service in a panic is not typically the behavior people expect from someone who believes there is nothing to hide. From that point forward, investigators shifted their full attention to the paperwork. Law enforcement began examining the death certificate that had been issued inside the house. One name quickly surfaced: Marlon. He was the doctor who had officially documented the death as cardiac arrest, while completely overlooking the obvious physical injuries. Authorities immediately brought him in for questioning. Inside the interview room, his story began to unravel. He contradicted himself repeatedly and could not provide a clear explanation for why he had made those decisions. As a result, he was taken into custody on the spot. But that first arrest immediately led investigators to another key figure. They learned that the transportation of Lisbeth's remains to the funeral home had been handled by a man named Richard. He worked there as a makeup specialist and funeral preparation technician. According to investigators, Richard had gone to the gated community at the direct request of Luis's family. He removed Lisbeth from the house without any forensic team or investigative unit being called to the scene. During questioning, investigators asked him a straightforward question. Why had he failed to notify authorities after seeing what appeared to be clear signs that this was not a natural death? Richard's answer was surprisingly simple. He said Luis told him that Lisbeth had accidentally fallen on the stairs, and he chose not to ask any further questions. At that point, the effort to conceal evidence began showing its first major cracks. Investigators were now looking at a coordinated series of actions in which multiple people appeared to be working together to legitimize the incident through paperwork and move everything toward burial before official investigators had the opportunity to fully examine the scene. On January 8, 2021, the focus of the investigation shifted directly to the house where Lisbeth lost her life. Armed with a search warrant, forensic investigators entered the couple's home inside the private residential community. Their objective was clear. They needed to either scientifically confirm or completely disprove the story that Lisbeth had suffered an accidental fall down the stairs. The forensic team darkened the rooms and began treating surfaces with chemical detection agents. The results came almost immediately. and they dealt a serious blow to the narrative that had been presented by the family. Luminol revealed extensive traces of biological evidence that someone had clearly attempted to clean using household products. But the most important detail was where those traces were found. Investigators located cleaned blood evidence on the kitchen floor. Additional traces extended across the living room and continued all the way to the bathroom tile. And this is where the physical evidence created a major problem for the accident theory. If Lisbeth had simply fallen on the staircase, how could traces connected to the incident appear in 3 separate areas across the first floor? The physical evidence pointed investigators toward a very different conclusion. The staircase appeared to be nothing more than the final stage of a carefully arranged scene. According to the reconstruction developed by investigators, Lisbeth moved through multiple rooms during the incident. Evidence suggested she attempted to defend herself and move away from the source of the aggression. Only after the confrontation had ended was her body allegedly moved near the staircase. The scene involving the fall appeared to have been deliberately staged from beginning to end. At the same time the search was taking place, investigators were also focusing on digital evidence. They seized servers and hard drives containing security camera recordings from the gated community. Their goal was to establish a complete timeline of every person and vehicle entering or leaving the property during the critical period. The digital archive provided exactly that. On the day of the incident, the security system recorded several non-residents entering the tightly controlled community. The unidentified visitors arrived at the property during the exact window of time when Lisbeth's parents still had no idea anything had happened. After reviewing the seized surveillance footage, investigators reached an official conclusion. By the time Lisbeth's mother and father arrived at the house that evening, an organized group had already been inside the residence. According to the investigation, those individuals entered the home, systematically removed evidence, cleaned portions of the living room floor, and worked to create a scene that would visually support the narrative of a tragic accident. That same day, prosecutors took the next legal step. Authorities submitted a formal request to Ecuador's National Institute of Statistics and Census for a certified copy of the original death record, the document that listed cardiac arrest as the cause of death. When investigators compared the physical evidence inside the home, the security camera footage, and the questionable medical documentation, the case began taking on a much clearer shape. What they were looking at no longer resembled a simple household accident. Instead, investigators believed they were dealing with a coordinated effort to conceal a serious crime. The official forensic report, the very reason authorities interrupted the funeral proceedings back in December, produced clear and definitive findings. This extensive document effectively overturned the original cardiac arrest certification. Forensic pathologists determined the true cause of Lisbeth's death. She had suffered a catastrophic head injury. The injury analysis indicated that the trauma was consistent with repeated impact from a heavy blunt object. Doctors also documented distinctive defensive injuries on her hands and forearms, including significant bruising and deep abrasions. Those findings suggested that Lisbeth had not simply lost her footing. Evidence indicated that she had actively tried to protect herself, block incoming blows, and escape the confrontation. But buried deeper within the report was another section that changed the entire understanding of the case. Think back to one of the strangest details from the beginning of this story. Lisbeth's hair was completely soaked when she was found near the staircase. Why would anyone wash her hair before emergency responders were ever called? The answer investigators received was as disturbing as it was practical. During laboratory analysis, specialists discovered traces of a chemical polymer inside injuries on the scalp. More specifically, they identified industrial-grade cyanoacrylate adhesive, a fast-bonding construction adhesive commonly used for instant fixation. According to the forensic findings, the individuals who entered the home before family members arrived appeared to have gone far beyond simple cleanup efforts. Investigators concluded that adhesive had been applied directly to open injuries in an apparent attempt to pull damaged tissue together and reduce the visible appearance of the wounds. Afterward, the hair was thoroughly washed with water. The moisture would have helped conceal dried adhesive residue, and remove visible traces running through the hair and across the skin. From the investigators' perspective, the plan achieved its intended result. When Lisbeth's parents arrived later that night, they were experiencing an overwhelming emotional shock. Under the dim lighting inside the house, they did not notice what investigators later described as altered injuries concealed beneath heavy strands of wet hair. What they saw was exactly what someone appeared to want them to see: the image of a sudden and tragic accident. Once investigators received those findings, they realized the true scale of what they were dealing with. This was no longer a case of a husband making a panicked attempt to hide evidence after a domestic argument spiraled out of control. The forensic evidence pointed to something much larger. Investigators concluded that multiple individuals appeared to have been involved, operating with preparation, specialized tools, and chemical materials already at their disposal. According to the evidence, each person seemed to play a specific role in removing traces of what had happened, transforming the original scene into something carefully staged and controlled. Then, on January 12th, just as the case was expected to move fully into a critical judicial phase, the system itself appeared to begin breaking down. That day, Lisbeth's parents arrived at the main prosecutor's office to provide what could have been some of the most important testimony against their son-in-law. But the interview never happened. An anonymous call was received, claiming that an explosive device had been placed inside the building. The response was immediate. Employees, witnesses, and visitors were evacuated. The surrounding area was secured, and all proceedings were halted. As expected, bomb technicians found nothing. No explosive device was ever discovered. Do you believe in coincidences that convenient? After years of studying cases like this, I've learned one hard lesson. When severe prison sentences and significant financial interests are involved, very few disruptions happen by accident. Apparently, investigators within Ecuador's anti-corruption division were asking the same questions. Just 3 days later, on January 15th, heavily armed tactical officers carried out a new series of raids. This time, they were not searching private homes belonging to suspects. The searches took place inside the prosecutor's office itself. Investigators seized computer servers and personal cell phones belonging to senior officials within the Legal Oversight Division. As digital evidence was examined, authorities uncovered what they described as extensive internal sabotage. According to investigators, someone inside the agency had been acting as an informant. Information was allegedly being shared with Luis's family in real time. Investigative updates, forensic findings, police movements, and even details regarding upcoming arrest documentation were reportedly being leaked as the case unfolded. That leak provided those involved with the most valuable resource possible: time. Time to prepare, time to coordinate, and most importantly, time to leave. By the time independent judges finally approved an official order for the immediate arrest of the primary suspect, he was already gone. Border control records showed that Luis had left Ecuador without interference and successfully crossed into neighboring Colombia. Ecuadorian authorities immediately turned to international partners for assistance. A request was urgently submitted to the headquarters of the International Criminal Police Organization, seeking the publication of a red notice, a global alert designed to help locate and detain a fugitive wanted by authorities. The request was approved quickly. Before long, the widower's profile appeared in international law enforcement databases around the world. For a moment, it seemed as though accountability was finally catching up, and his return to face justice appeared to be only a matter of time. But at this stage, something happened that completely shattered confidence in the system. As it turned out, authorities in Colombia could not legally place Luis under arrest. The reason was almost unbelievable. Investigators discovered that the official request submitted by Ecuador contained major spelling errors in the full legal name of the person being sought. Somewhere within the paperwork process, someone had once again made what was described as a mistake. From a legal standpoint, that international alert became essentially unenforceable. because of a handful of errors on official documents, the international search effort stalled, and the man investigators believed had coordinated the cleanup of the crime scene gained valuable time to disappear. Now let's put together the established facts, phone records, medical findings, and surveillance timelines to reconstruct what investigators believe happened that day. December 21st. Earlier in the day, Lisbeth was inside the house working remotely on her computer. At some point, Luis returned home. According to the evidence later gathered by investigators, a confrontation began between the couple and escalated very quickly into a physical altercation. Medical examiners were able to narrow the estimated time of death to a small window between 2:30 p.m. and 3 p.m. During that 30-minute period, investigators believe Lisbeth sustained the fatal injuries while attempting to protect herself and moving from the kitchen through the living room and toward the bathroom. What happened next is what stands out the most. The actions that followed do not resemble panic. They do not resemble confusion. And they certainly do not resemble someone desperately trying to save a loved one. Luis did not call emergency services. He did not request medical assistance. He did not immediately flee. Instead, he picked up his phone and called his father, Bolivar. According to the investigative theory, that single phone call set an entire operation into motion. One by one, the necessary individuals arrived at the gated community without difficulty. First came Bolivar, then came Dr. Marlin. After that arrived Richard from the funeral home. Investigators believe that together, they transformed the location into two things at once: a cleanup site and a staging area. Each person appeared to have a specific responsibility. According to the evidence presented by authorities, biological traces connected to the incident were systematically removed. The body was repositioned near the staircase, and official documentation was prepared that would appear convincing to anyone encountering the scene for the first time. While that work was allegedly taking place inside the house, investigators believe Luis was focused on another critical objective: creating an alibi. He left the residence, got behind the wheel, and followed what appeared to be his normal routine. He visited the family business. He handled work-related matters in the presence of witnesses. Later, he went to the gym. At some point, he received a cut above his eyebrow. The explanation later given was that he had been approached by street robbers. From an investigative perspective, that detail fit neatly into the narrative that would eventually be presented. A frightened husband with an injury calls his wife to tell her what happened. She becomes overwhelmed, loses her footing, and falls down the stairs. That was the story. Late that evening, after the workday and gym session had ended, Luis returned to the gated community. Inside the house, investigators believe a carefully prepared scene was waiting for him. By that point, everything had already been arranged. Only after those involved were satisfied that the scene appeared convincing did the final step take place. The clock approached 11:30 p.m. Bolivar picked up his phone, found Lisbeth's mother in his contacts, and delivered the same words that set this entire story in motion. "Come over." She's gone. By the summer of 2021, the justice system finally began issuing its first rulings, and the results left many people stunned. One of the first individuals to appear in court was Richard, the funeral home technician, who, according to investigators, applied chemical substances to Lisbeth's injuries and washed away visible traces from her hair. For his role in the destruction of evidence connected to a serious crime, the court sentenced him to 5 months in prison, along with a financial penalty. For Lisbeth's family, the decision felt less like justice and more like an insult to everything they had endured. Relatives openly criticized the outcome, telling reporters they believed the system had failed them. The case continued moving forward at a painfully slow pace. 2 years later, in the middle of 2023, verdicts were handed down to 2 more individuals connected to the cover-up. Dr. Marlin, the physician who prepared the false cardiac arrest certificate at the scene, and Luis's mother, Nancy, were each sentenced to 3 years in prison for procedural fraud. That was the maximum penalty available under the charges brought against those accused of helping conceal what happened inside the home. But the central figure in the case remains beyond the reach of the courts. Under Ecuadorian law, the charge facing Luis carries a potential prison sentence of 22 to 26 years. However, investigators encountered a major legal obstacle. The country's laws do not allow a trial of this nature to proceed to a final verdict, while the defendant remains absent. As a result, the entire process has effectively stalled. Nothing can move forward until authorities physically bring Luis into the courtroom. And at this point, that has proven impossible. Luis, his brother Miguel, and his father Bolivar, the man investigators believe set the cover-up in motion with a single late-night phone call, vanished. Authorities believe they took advantage of the warning time allegedly provided through internal leaks and disappeared beyond Ecuador's borders. International red notices remain active in global law enforcement databases, but so far, they have produced no tangible results. As of 2025, this case remains unresolved. Lisbeth's mother and father refuse to walk away from the fight. They continue organizing public marches throughout Guayaquil, drawing hundreds of supporters and demanding accountability from government institutions. Their goal is simple: to pressure authorities into renewing active efforts to locate the fugitives and bring the case back into motion. After reviewing hundreds of pages of investigative records connected to stories like this, I keep coming back to the same conclusion. The biggest issue in this case was never the brilliance of the people involved. According to the evidence presented over the years, the entire plan might have collapsed within hours, if not for alleged interference, internal leaks, and institutional failures. There may be no such thing as a perfect crime. But history has shown that powerful connections can sometimes delay accountability far longer than anyone expects. So what do you think? Can public pressure force the system to finish what it started? Or have the fugitives already built new lives beyond the reach of the investigation? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.